Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Wong, and I'm an author and associate professor of creative writing in the English department at the University of Winnipeg. I'm a Chinese woman with blonde hair, and there's a painting of maple leaves behind me. I want to welcome you all to our fifth event for our publishing speaker series. And today we are featuring a reading and Q&A with award-winning author Anuja Varghese, who is such a force in the short story world, and we are so lucky to have her joining us today. Her first book, Chrysalis, is an amazing literary feat, and it transcends genres and boundaries. And when you read it, you will feel creepy dread, pathos, and hope. So it's such a wonderful and terrifying and electrifying journey. So definitely read it if you haven't yet. Today's event will be recorded, so if you do not want to be on camera, please keep your video off. We also ask that you keep your mics muted. We have a lot of questions submitted already, so we will only turn to chat if there is time. We want to thank the English department and the research office at the University of Winnipeg for your support of this event. Today, we acknowledge that we live and work in the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Oji-Cree nations. The University of Winnipeg sits in Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral and traditional homeland of Anishinaabe peoples. As a settler color writer, I am not only committed to honoring and following the lead of the land, water, and cultural protectors of the space, but I also am a constant and forever student of the remarkable stories and their tellings by Indigenous peoples here and around the world. Thank you for the space, and I'm very grateful to all of you for joining us today. And if you feel moved to, please share where you're coming from in the chat on Zoom. So we're very, very excited to welcome Anuja Varghese, she, her, who is an award-winning writer and editor based in Hamilton, Ontario. Whoever is still is not on mute, please go on mute. Thank you. Her work has appeared in several literary magazines and anthologies, and she's a fiction editor at the X-Periton. Her debut short story collection, titled Chrysalis, explores South Asian diaspora experience through a feminist, queer, and speculative lens. In 2023, Chrysalis won the Writers' Trust of Canada Dane Ogilvie Prize and the Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction, which is a huge deal for those of you who don't know. And in 2024 was longlisted for the Carol Shields Prize for Fiction, also another huge deal. You can find Anuja on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Anuja_V across all platforms, or you can visit her website at anujavarghese.com. So let's welcome Anuja.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Can I ask that you start today's session with a brief reading?
Yeah, for sure. So I thought I would I'm gonna read a little bit from Chrysalis. So these are 15 genre blending stories. They're not linked stories, but the theme that links them is this idea of women and girls, primarily women and girls of color and queer folks in moments of transformation. So there's elements of horror, fantasy, fairy tale throughout these stories. And I'm going to read a little bit, just the very beginning, from a story called The Vitala's Song. A Vitala, if folks don't know, is like a revenant type creature from Hindu mythology, kind of a precursor of our modern conception of the vampire. So this is The Vitala's Song. The river is vast and full of ashes. The rickshaw-wala warns the foreigner not to drink the water. The woman adjusts her sunglasses even though the sun has not yet risen and the sky is still draped in purple, layered with the delicate lace of a pre-dawn fog. She peppers the driver with questions, first in English with poor results, then in halting Hindi about the river, the temples that line it, and the pyres that billow smoke across its surface. He is short on answers and only points her in the direction of the Ghats. She pays him the agreed-upon sum and climbs down from the bicycle-drawn cart. He will take her no further than this. I watch, veiled, cursing this half-blind corpse whose body I have borrowed. I see then what I have come here for. Under one arm, the foreigner cradles a silver urn. My kind consumes flesh, not ash. But for the woman in the urn, I will make an exception. The foreigner begins to make her way down the steps, and I follow. No one looks twice at a beggar woman with an acid scarred face. At least here by the water's edge, the smell of rot that seeps through the cotton sari in which this body was killed is masked by all the other smells mingling together around me: dead fish and fire, sewage and smoke. The woman has come dressed in a black salwar kameez. Black is the color of mourning in the country she calls home. In this country, we wear white to part with our dead, and soon the ghats will be crowded with men in white kurtas, women weeping, children scolded into solemnity, all there to feed the river, the remains of those they loved. But what of those who die unloved? What of those whose families cast them out, who will pay no priest to chant over their pyres and see their souls safely off? They are left to the charnel grounds. Not many cities allow such places anymore, abandoned groves of withered fruit trees where dead bodies are left to decompose, unburied, unburnt. It is unsanitary, they say now, a risk to public health. But in this city where I was once young and knew what it was to love defiantly, two charnel grounds still exist, one to the east marked by a Bodhi tree, and one to the west marked by a Naga tree. Today you would have to be willing to make some dubious inquiries to find these unholy sites. Or, like me, you would have to live there. But I wouldn't wish such an eternity on anyone, no matter what their crime. Mine was merely to love the woman in the urn. And I'm going to leave it there. So the rest of that story, it's like half ghost story, half queer love story, kind of mashed together.
Thank you. I love that story. And I also just love how you read it. I also listened to Chrysalis on the audiobook and you narrate it yourself. And it's just such an experience, just hearing it being performed and also reading it. It's one of those things that, you have to have both, right?
Yeah, it was super fun to get to record these stories for the audiobook. I do like a bit of other voiceover work, but I do the most boring, like corporate voiceovers. So it was very fun to get to do these stories that I not only, wrote and kind of love these characters, but just to get to do something more fun than like bath fitter. Do you know what I mean?
I had no idea you were a voice actor. That's
I mean,
amazing.
actor is a stretch.
Still, that's so great.
Yeah.
I have some questions for you, if
Okay.
that's okay. So, you are an award-winning, a multi-award winning author, and you're also an editor.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned before, Chrysalis is so breathtaking, and it's really such, a triumph in so many ways. Can you talk about your trajectory to becoming a successful published author?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very kind of introduction to things. Yeah, so I always kind of wrote for myself for fun, just like scribbling something. But I had never considered it as a career, doing it in any kind of professional context. I have a career. I still have a career in the nonprofit sector. So I was working in management, at like a national health charity. And what happened was kind of pre-pandemic, very suddenly and unexpectedly, I lost my job. They were just like, due to restructuring, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. Go home. And I mean, what do you do in that moment? So I don't know. For me, I kind of had to, I took the moment to be like, okay, what do I actually want to do? And more importantly, I think what can I do that nobody can get rid of me from? Nobody can say like, this has been eliminated, you've been fired, you've been whatever. What can only I do that nobody can take away? And the answer for me was, I'm gonna write. I'm gonna give it a real shot. And I didn't know. in that moment if anything would come of it. I didn't know if I'd write anything good, if anybody would read it, if it would get published. I wasn't even really thinking about that. I just made the choice that like I'm gonna try and write and I'm gonna try and get my words out into the world. So that was the like initial decision making of it. So what does that look like practically? So I started taking some writing workshops locally here in Hamilton where I live. I enrolled in the creative writing program through U of T. I just started attending events. I tried to like find, we talk so often about literary community, but that can be like a nebulous thing. What is that? What does it mean to be part of a literary community? So I tried to like find what are the local literary events that are happening? How can I be a part of things? How can I start going to book launches and reading series and just meeting other writers, going to festivals and things like that. I became a volunteer reader with the Ex-Puritan. So now, a couple of years later, I'm the fiction editor at the Ex-Puritan. So it's just an example of how starting to become part of like those literary communities can lead to other opportunities within the community later on. So I was doing all these things. I started kind of sending my stories out to contests and to literary magazines, got a whole lot of rejections along the way. I was very lucky to be connected to a mentor in Farzana Doctor, who's a great a Canadian author based in Toronto. Um, so she was my mentor through the BIPOC Writers Connect conference, which is a conference that the Writers Union of Canada holds every year. They used to do it in person. I think they do it virtually now. And it's like for BIPOC emerging writers, you get paired with kind of a more established BIPOC writer and you get a little bit of mentorship. They give you some feedback on your work. And Farzana's feedback was really, I just had stories on paper on a table, like, here you go. And she was like, oh, maybe there's a book here. Have you thought about that? And how would you like, what would you add to these, three, four stories that you have if you were to think about what a book might look like? Um, so then I was like, oh, well, maybe there is a book here. And I sort of more intentionally started trying to put the stories together in a way that worked. Um, I had to, it took me a little while to find my way through that process, I think, because when I um when I first started thinking about it, like, I'm going to write this can like capital can lit, right? Capital C, capital L. What are the short stories that the people really want to read? And I was writing things that I thought other people would like or that I thought was what would fit in Canlit. And they were just bad. Like they were good. They were good stories. They weren't my voice, really. I was trying to do something that I thought someone else would like, or that some, I don't know, general broad reader would like. But on the side of doing that real literary, capital L literary work, I was also just writing the stuff that was fun for me to write. So I was doing like the weird stuff and the ghost stories and um the weird fantasy and fairy tales because that was fun for me. And it turned out that what was fun for me to write was also fun for people to read. So the more I started sending that stuff out, I was just getting so much feedback. People wanted more of that, and that was what was sort of getting published. So I kind of had to like give myself permission to be like, maybe my book is all of these things. Maybe it can be everything together. So I scrapped the stuff that didn't feel like me and just allowed it to be this sort of genre blending thing. I finished the manuscript like end of 2020. It was a pandemic. There wasn't a lot to do that year. I sent it out kind of into the world. I didn't hear anything. I got some rejections. And then after that, I didn't hear anything for 9 months. So I was like, okay, I guess nobody wants it. I was totally ready to put the whole thing in a drawer, forget about it. And I started writing something else. 9 months later, I got responses from a couple different publishers, and I was able to kind of make the choice to go with House Financy. And so I signed that deal in 2022. The book came out in 2023. And I really just spent kind of the past year doing stuff like this, doing like different events and classroom visits and book clubs and festivals. And so it's been a real ride over the past few years to get to this point.
I love that story. I love hearing what happens behind a book. And I can't believe it was a pandemic book because I know everyone was writing books, right? And baking bread when during the start of 2020. And yours is such an inspiring story.
Yeah, well, I can't bake bread, so I better have made something.
You made a book. That's better, I
Yeah.
think. Perfect. And I'm just so glad that it's out in the world now. And for our students and newer writers, can you tell us what it's like having such a successful debut book? You've talked about festivals, you've talked a little bit about book clubs and all these things. Like, what is that
Mhm.
publishing and promotional experience like? Because I think a lot of people think, okay, we write a book, you give it to a publisher, an editor, and then it's done. It's not done, right?
It's not done. It's not done. So yeah, it's and so I mean, House of Nancy is an independent publisher. So you have kind of your big five publishers, you have your Canadian indie publishers, they have people who are self-publishing, and all those different ways of getting your stories out into the world are going to have different levels of like support with your marketing and your events and how you get your book into readers' hands. But a lot of it, regardless of how you do it, a lot of it does come back to you as the author, right? And finding ways to actually connect with readers. So it's been a lot of that over the past year. And I think I'm not going to say I had low expectations for my own book, but I think I had realistic expectations, right? When you have a debut short story collection, nobody knows who you are. It's kind of the stories are a little weird. There's no necessarily like hook to it. People don't recognize your name. So I was kind of like, if it, I hope it gets some good reviews. I hope I get to go to like one or two festivals. So I was really trying to set myself up with these like realistic expectations. So, everything that's happened beyond that has been lovely and surprising. Um, and what I found too, a lot of people have told me at different events, like, I never read short stories, but like, I'll give this one a try. So I don't, if it's even if that like sticker, award sticker on the cover or whatever it is what convinces someone to pick up a book that they would never have picked up otherwise, that's great. Like, let me be your gateway into short stories.
I love that. And I think it's really important what you said about being realistic, right? That expectation because so many new writers go in with this thing like, okay, I'm gonna get, a six-figure book deal and a million festivals and have, a New York Times bestseller. I think a lot of people really think that that's gonna happen. But often what happens is you think like what will happen is your agent and three other people will read the book, right? Or not even. Or it comes out on publication day and there's silence, right? And that's something that, as writers, we can't always control, right? And
Yeah.
I love that, how you came in
Yeah.
with like being realistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. And my next question, I think I read in this interview, and you were mentioning that you'd worked in the nonprofit sector, and I think I read in a bio as well. You're also an educator, and now we know that you're a voice actor, so you're multi-talented.
Yeah.
Um, For students at U Winnipeg, many of them have to work practical jobs to support themselves and take care of these families and their families. How do you navigate and balance all these roles?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And like, just to be really kind of honest about it, even especially in Canada, but like, even if you consider the writers who you would consider like successful writers, or they have, a best-selling book, most of them are still working some other job. There's very few writers who get to just be a writer full time in Canada. It's very hard to like make that financially work for people. So we're all kind of doing multiple things, whether that's some other job completely, or in a lot of cases, it is something tangentially related to writing. If you're doing other editing or teaching or things like that, to support your writing practice or to balance with your writing practice. So I do still have my job in the nonprofit sector. I work for the YWCA here in Hamilton. And that's been really interesting just because that kind of everyday work of that we do at the YWCA is so related to how do we empower women and girls? What are the systems of oppression that marginalized folks are facing, and how do we dismantle those? And a lot of that day-to-day work found its way into my writing. So, I mean, that's been an interesting sort of way that my like work life and creative life have come together. But in terms of like, how do you balance those things? I mean, I don't know. For a long time, I was sort of like, I don't know, envious, I guess, of like my friends or other writers who I saw like they get to just, they're going to go off and do an MFA for 2 years and just really focus on their writing, or even like I'm going to go do a writing workshop for a month, or I'm going to go do a residency for 3 weeks. Like those, I have two kids and a job, and like those kind of things did not feel realistic to me. So I had to really stop. I had to like reframe it in my head that waiting for that magical time when I will be able to like shut the world out and just focus on my writing, because that was never going to happen for me. So I had to reframe that in my head, that you cannot wait for this perfect set of conditions where that's going to really support your writing, and trust that there are ways to write within the life that you have. So, whether that means like being flexible with yourself, knowing that, hours in the day that you have to spend on your job, or, hours in the day that you are going to spend with your family, and like what are the chunks of your day that you can, or your night in some cases, that you can carve out to spend with your writing. What are the best ways for you to create like a generative space? For some people, that's time that I have to be completely alone. And when can I find that? Where can I find that in my life? For some people, it's like I'm gonna have one, even if it's, I don't really believe in this. Oh, you have to write every day, because whatever, I can't do that. I don't think anybody has to do that. Maybe it works for some people. It doesn't work for me. But like for some people, maybe it's once a week. I'm gonna meet with my writing buddy, and we're gonna go to a cafe, and we're just gonna sit in silence and both work on our things. Just to have that connection point, whatever it is, if it's something that you're doing every day, every week, whatever, some way that you're bringing your writing into your existing life that works for you. And what works for me might not work for you, might not work for you. So you can't really like compare what other people are doing, or like if someone is able to finish a book, like, oh, I wrote my book in 6 months. Okay, good for you. It might take you 2 years to finish your book, but like the work takes what it takes, and it's okay. Whatever works for you to be like your truest creative self, it's okay, do that.
That's really great advice. Yeah. And I really like what you said, not writing every day, because it's so ableist to think that everyone has the time and the energy to be, writing every day. And it's not.
Yeah, I think I don't know, it was a couple of years ago, but like when the Gillers used to be on TV, and they show each of the nominees in their home, and one of them, like it was an old man writer, and he was like, oh, I get up in the morning and have my coffee, and it's this beautiful view from his beautiful house. I'm like, man, like I get up in the morning and get my kids ready for school. Like I am not dedicating the first 4 hours of my morning to like my writing practice. So, some of the things we see about the most successful writers in the world, and how they might be able to work, like do not compare yourself to that. And it doesn't mean, if you don't have that, it absolutely does not mean you will not be successful, you will not be creative, you don't have the ability to still like write something really beautiful.
Hmm. It's really good to know. And sometimes it's just about writing when you can. If you have 15 minutes between, errands or whatever, that means sitting down and write.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
mhm.
I'm at the desk right now. I do have this like desk space, but I write very little here. Honestly, I actually write on my phone most of the time, because that's what I have with me all the time.
Yeah, that's what a lot of writers do. Like when I'm getting the bus, I'm talking to myself on the phone. Yeah.
And people think you're nuts, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Right? You're allowed to do that. You're a writer. And what advice do you have for those writers who come from immigrant or working class backgrounds? Because it's not, we're told that, it's not a possibility to be a writer, right? You have to get a practical job if you come from an immigrant background
Yeah.
often, right?
Oh yeah.
Because it does
Yeah.
not pay. It does not pay well.
It does not pay well. My parents were definitely like said that. We're sort of like you can like sure write as a hobby, but you like yeah, get a real job basically. Um so I mean I always say like find your people. And your people might not be they might be, but they might not be your family. They might not be your immediate group of friends. They might not be your usual like cultural community who you might see on a regular basis. But like, I mean, maybe this group and this kind of like writing space might be your people. Maybe you find them online through like other writing groups. Maybe you find them through a book club if there's like a particular genre of book that you're really into or that you're writing in. But like find the people that are going to sort of see you and hear your voice and want your story because they're out there. They're really out there. And they might not be immediate to you, but it's so worth it to find those people because you will be able to support them and they will be able to support you.
It's really good advice. Find your people, right? And that's
Find your
hopefully it's in
people.
this Zoom room here or in the
Yeah.
classroom. Yes. And I want to go back to craft and writing short stories. So I'm curious. So you finished Chrysalis, and I'm wondering, has your understanding of the short story form changed? So when you write a short story now, is it the same as it was before? How do you plot something out?
I don't know how, to be honest, I don't know how it's changed because I don't know. I mean, I think I've only written maybe one or two sort of new short stories
Mhm.
since Chrysalis. I'm working on a novel length thing, so that's a whole other challenge in itself. But I don't know that my approach has really changed. For me, a story always starts either in like a very specific kind of sensory place, like the way something smells or tastes, the way someone's voice sounds, the way like a very particular place feels when you're in it. So it's either that, some kind of specific sensory thing, or sometimes I'll have a very strong sense of where a story is going to end. Like a last line of dialogue that resonates really strongly or a last feeling or image that I know this is where this thing ends. And then it's kind of a work back process. Like, how did we get here? Who is this person and how did they get to this place? So then I'm just kind of working backwards to find out where does the story start? How do we get to this last thing? But that's usually how a story develops for me. And I don't know that that process has necessarily changed too much. That is not how I'm building a novel at all. So that is a bit of a different process. But yeah, that's how short stories usually take shape for me.
That's really helpful advice because they're writing short stories in this class. So
Nice.
they've been doing the peer workshops. And I think that relates to the next question because a lot of students are wondering like what do you do when you get stuck? Right. And I like the idea of, moving backwards and how do you get to that last image, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good question. I think everybody gets stuck. I think even like writers who have two, three, four, five, 10, 30 books in the world, like it never, I swear it sounds terrible, but it never gets easier. It's always, you always get to a point where you're like, what is this? You're stuck in it. So when that happens to me, and again, people have very different approaches to this. Some people will tell you like, no, like force your way through it. For me, I write where the energy is. So if I'm working on something and it's not coming and I'm forcing it and everything I'm writing feels forced and gross and uh I will leave that for a little while. I usually have like two or three different things that I could potentially work on. So it could be a short story. Sometimes I work on fanfic just for fun. Sometimes I'm working on something like in collaboration with somebody else, like you're just passing something back and forth. These are not things necessarily that are ever going to get published. They're things for fun. They're things to make writing feel fresh and fun for you. And I also just think that sometimes, you don't want to write anything, and that is also fine, but you can, I don't know, like go read something. Get in your car and go drive somewhere you've never been. Chat with a friend about, I don't know, like go to a museum. I feel like all these different ways of taking in other art all like go into the soup of the thing that you're working on, and you just stir it around, and when you come back to it, like you will still pull from it. It never goes away. The thing that you are working on, the thing that you're trying to write is always percolating in the back of your head somewhere. So even if you're not physically like writing it, it's there. And the more stuff you put in, the more you feed it, when you come back to the page at some point, that stuff will make its way out, I think, into your story and help you find new ways into it or around it or through it.
That's really great advice. And it's inspiring to know that everyone gets stuck, right? it's not a new writer
Absolutely.
problem because each story, each book is always different, right? Because we're not
So
writing the
different.
same story or the same structure,
Yeah.
right? So it's almost like learning how to rewrite again for each project.
Every time, which is its
Mhm.
own misery and its own joy.
Yes. And I really like how you talked about the process being different because often I go into it thinking, I think I'm a glutton for punishment because I just go straight through the book. Like I'm chronological order, right? And I might try your idea of like taking a break and then coming back again to that scene because I'm just like, I'm gonna push through it.
Yeah, but I mean, if that works for you, do that.
No, I think, it's good to try something else, right? It's always great to learn from other writers and try
Yeah.
what works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Um, and could you maybe share your process of writing and putting together Chrysalis for us? And what did that process look like? Because I know some students who want to write short story collections, right? And they have different short stories. How do you
Yeah.
assemble that?
Yeah. So I think when I first sort of put together what I thought like was a decent manuscript for a short story collection, I think I had about 20 stories in there. And then kind of in the process of like working with the editor at House of Anansi was sort of this going through them, her sort of saying, here's the order I think makes sense, having a conversation about balancing, because we knew it was going to be sort of genre blending. So then you can't have 18 stories that are like speculative and two that aren't, because it'll feel weird for the reader. So trying to really have a balance of the sort of speculative stories versus more realist stories, trying to balance stories that are a little shorter versus ones that are longer, stories that feel a little heavier for the reader versus ones that are a little lighter. So all those kind of considerations in terms of putting the actual stories together in an order. And it was really my editor, I think, that took the lead on that process, and it has had more of a like a reader focused idea. Like, what is the experience for the reader versus me saying like, here are my babies and here's how I want them to be in my book. And she was like, no, so we had that sort of back and forth. And yeah, I kind of like the order that they ended up in.
That's interesting thinking about the reader, right? Because it's so often when we're writing, we're just writing for ourselves, right? And then thinking
Yeah,
about, okay, what experience do I give someone who's going to pick up my book, right? Because we want them to feel a certain way, right? When they get to the end of the short story collection. I don't know if you have
yeah.
this experience. My editor was like, well, we want them to feel some sort of hope, right? We don't want them to feel like they're dying and in misery. And I'm like, okay, what's wrong with that, right? But of course,
That's
thinking about the
exactly what I
reader.
want.
So it's not what we want, it's what
Yeah.
the audience or readers want. Hmm.
Yeah. But I do think like that is certainly, once you get to that, like, how are we going to sell this book phase of things? that's a great conversation to have with your publisher, your editor, whatever. I think before you get to that point when it's just you and the words, like don't worry about that. Write for you. Write for you. Don't write for your imagined reader.
Mhm. Exactly. I think it's so special, like that first book, because you'll never get that feeling again of not
Yeah.
having an audience, right? Because you're just you and the page. And then
Yeah.
afterwards, that there's an expectation, right? So now you have that audience that you're writing for. So really enjoy that
Yeah.
moment, I think.
No pressure. It's fine.
No pressure. Yeah, it's completely fine, right? And then another question from students, they were wondering if there were any challenges that still phase you as an experienced writer. A student really wanted to know, how do you stay focused and how do you get to the finish line for each story?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think any challenges still face me. So I think like in terms of a particular challenge for me right now, that sort of still phases me, obviously trying to move from just, writing exclusively short stories for so long to now trying to move to writing a novel, has been challenging in different ways. Like it's a really different approach, a completely different scope. So that's been a bit of a different journey. But in terms of short stories and like how do you stay focused and get to the finish line of a story, for me, um, usually when I'm in it and you know a story is kind of working, I have this feeling that it wants to get out, and so it's trying to let the story that wants to come out get out. So um and if I do find myself in a point where it's stuck, or I'm losing focus on it. Like if you are not interested in the story anymore, something is not working there, right? So you either need to go back and look at, like, and it's okay. It's okay to be halfway through something and be like, I'm not interested in this anymore. This isn't working or whatever, and to move on to something else. That's fine. Not You don't have to force yourself to finish writing anything. You don't have to force yourself to finish reading anything. It's fine. um, but yeah, I think when something is working and when there's energy there, follow that.
Mhm. That's great advice, right? Because I think so often, students are sort of trained to think like, okay, it's a deadline. I have to just finish it, right? It doesn't matter. They're not thinking about whether or not they're interested in something. But I think creative writing, there's something about it, right? We can tell when someone is bored by what they're writing about.
Yeah, yeah. Or you wrote it because you had to, or you know what I mean, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. I mean, there is something to be said for like a bit of gently forced accountability, I guess, because I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's we have tons of ideas and you're sometimes really excited to like get started with an idea, but then you get to that kind of messy middle of the story, or you're not really sure, like, how do you finish this. And when you get to that kind of part that's a little more challenging, a little messier, it can be easy to just abandon it, even if you do feel like, oh, it was such a good idea, but I just didn't know what to do. So yeah, I think that's where it can be really helpful. Again, you have this group in this class, or you may find another kind of writing group, writing partner, whatever it is, just to have other people who you are accountable to in some way. Again, whether you are getting together to write together, or even, you may say, okay, we're going to meet once every 2 weeks and we're all going to have something new to share. So you kind of force yourself to like write something new, whether it's, something new in a story you were already working on, or I started something new, or I finished something, just because you have to have something. Like, they're gonna have something, so I have to have something, and it kind of forces you to do it.
Mhm. That's really good advice. Peer pressure, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
In like a gentle, supportive way.
A gentle, supportive peer pressure group. That's what
Yeah.
accountability is.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. So, Chrysalis, as we mentioned before, it's a genre blending feat of imagination, right? It doesn't have but you can't categorize it just in one genre. There's horror, there's pathos, and all kinds of transformation for your queer and racialized characters.
Mhm.
And do you think there's an expectation for women of color and marginalized writers to write about certain subjects and follow cultural narratives in order to be successful in mainstream publishing? And I know you touched upon it a little bit in the beginning. And I'm asking this question as well because I'm constantly told like I'm just too weird, right? It's not mainstream enough. It's too niche. And I'm just so curious about your experience.
Yeah, I was worried about it. When I started putting the stories together, I was kind of like, oh, like who is the reader for this? Is it going to be too weird? Is it like if you are a horror reader, this is not just horror, so like maybe those people are going to be turned off. It is not just literary fiction, so maybe those people are going to be turned off with the word genre. So I don't know, when you start, and then I just had to stop thinking about it. I had to stop thinking about like who is it for and how do you make the most people like it? And I had to just give myself permission to like write the stories that I wanted to write and that felt the most fun and the most true for me. Um, is there pressure like for racialized people to write like particular narratives? I think there has been. I think that there's a lot more openness, I hope. I think it's changing in CanLit and just wider lit for diverse stories. For my stories in particular, like, I don't know, I just by default, I wrote most of my first kind of stories were just about like straight white people because that's mostly what I had read and what I was seeing in the mainstream. So I was just like, okay, I didn't even think about it. It just, that's what I was doing. And I had to very intentionally decide, why am I doing this? I wish there were more stories about people that look like me. Why aren't I writing them? And so I had to be very intentional about that choice. And then I also just wanted to put people that look like me in stories where I hadn't seen them. So this kind of stories that I like to read. So I love to read horror. I love to read fantasy. I love to read fairy tales. But for a long time, I think people of color have been sort of underrepresented in those genres. Or we're like the first one to be killed. You know what I mean? We're like the virgins and the victims and the nerds. So I wanted to give my characters more choices than we've previously been given. So I think that's the only way to change like existing narratives, right? You have to push against those walls to make space, or else there's no space.
That's really beautifully said, right? Just to know that, you're writing and trusting the audience and publishers to understand that this is our vision. Of course, there are going to be people who tell us that, we're not mainstream enough, right? And there's no audience for that, but time and time again, right? There are stories, right, that get published and then get that attention that they deserve. So it's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great. And do you think female authors of color tend to get more pushback about having unlikable narrators than their white male counterparts? Because I get this all the time. They're always like, he's so unlikable. Why did you write this?
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we're gonna have this like stupid debate forever, right? Like that we should all write uh nicer women. That was the first thing my mom said when she read this when she skimmed these stories. She was like, "Oh, why did you write this? Why did you write this?" So basically, like if you were gonna write about like brown people, especially brown women, why can't you write nicer, normal stories? Why can't you write about like are people doing wonderful things, nice, good stories, happy stories? Man, but like I don't know, my experiences haven't all been nice, you know? I don't think
Mhm.
our truths are not always nice. And maybe we don't have to always be nice to be seen. And maybe we don't have to be nice to be reflected and to be valued and to be worthy of like being main characters. Maybe niceness is not the goal, you know? So I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm all for it.
Absolutely.
I'm all for monstrous, dangerous, messed up, complicated, uh, main character women and queer folks and racialized folks in more books.
I love that. Yeah. It's so funny how so many readers will just project on a writer and be like, why did you do that? Why? It's not your
Yeah.
story, right? Why did you air your family's dirty laundry? Things like that. I have people come up to me all the time and I'm just like, I'm going to walk the other way and pretend I didn't hear. Um, and that leads me to my next question. So, I'm always curious to hear what other writers have in terms of, sometimes readers will like mistake or they read BIPOC fiction as autobiography or memoir. And it does come from this racist assumption that BIPOC authors lack imagination and we can't write outside our lived experiences. Did you have that experience with Chrysalis? Also asking because a lot of readers assumed many of the characters in my collection were based on my own life, and many of the stories took place in like the Tang Dynasty, for example. And I was like, "Did you not read carefully? How can I be alive in the Tang Dynasty?" So I always want to know other people's experiences.
Yeah. Um, I don't, so I've had both of those things, I think. I've had and a lot of just like full disclosure, I guess, is that a lot of the sort of microaggressions and like characters and things like that are based on sort of real things that happened either to me or to friends or to colleagues and things like that. But I've had both people coming to me and saying like, "Well, you wrote this about brown women's experience, but that's not my experience. So like you did not speak truthfully for all of us." And I'm like, I was not trying to. And on the flip side of that, people coming and saying like this story like you wrote that is me, that's my experience. And I'm like, no girl, that's me, that's my experience, but I'm glad that it resonated. You know what I mean? So there's both sides of that, and I don't think you can ever like make everybody happy. You can only write the story that feels sort of most authentic to you and
Mhm.
that feels the most fun or the most true or whatever it is. Write that, and people will experience it as a reader how they will take it as they will, and there's very little you can do to control that.
It's great advice. Just knowing that we cannot control what readers say about our work, right? Once it's out
No.
there, it no longer belongs to you, right? That's
Yeah,
the hardest part
I think
about being
that's
a
really
writer, I
true.
think.
Like, I think that's really true. You really only like control what you create. You can only
Hmm.
control what you create, right? You don't control if anyone likes it or reads it or what they say about it or if it gets published. You don't control any of it. So control what you can, and that's really like you as a creative person and your own sort of creative voice.
It sounds harsh, but it is realistic, right? To know that you can't control anything else, right?
Yeah. There's something kind of freeing about it too, right? If you
That's
just
true.
you like those things are beyond my control, but I can sit at my computer, or I can get my notebook and pen, and in that space, this space between you and the screen or between you and the page, you control everything. You control everything in that space. And there's something really like freeing about that.
Hmm. Yeah, the creative process, going back to it as art and not a product. I think that's
Yeah,
really important
yes.
to think about. Yeah,
Yes,
and we
absolutely.
often writers we get lost in that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, especially because I think with, social media and stuff, people mostly like you see people's successes, right? You see when they win the big awards and you see the six-figure deals and all these like cool things. We start to get this idea that like, oh, my book should do that, or like everybody's book should do that, or maybe it's easy to do that. Um, but yeah, you often don't see the like hundreds of rejections they got before that point, or whatever it took to get there. And that so much of getting to those things is some alchemy of luck and timing and things like that, so that nobody really controls.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think this thing to realize that not everyone gets published at the same time, right? And that's always hard, right? I think
Yeah.
with a lot of writers and starting writing groups. In
Yeah.
the interest of time, would you like to do a lightning round?
Yeah, sure. Lightning round.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, are you ready?
Yes.
Scroll all the way down. All right. Being a debut author is like fill in the blank.
Being a debut author is like, oh, de being a debut author is like if every day was the first day of school.
Oh, okay. And I think it depends on whether or not you like school.
Yes. Yeah, or like a little bit of all of that, right? Every day is like you don't know, people message you with different things. Some you may get invitations to things, you may not get invitations to things. So it's just this really it's every day is a new day.
Yeah. Some days are really busy, some days are not busy, right?
That's it.
Yes. Great. Okay, one thing you wish you had known before becoming a creative writer.
One thing I wish I had known. I think I wish I had known like or thought more about writing just for me. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? I think we're all creative writers. You're a creative writer. If you write at all, you're a creative writer, right? That there's whether or not it gets published or anything else, like that's beside the point. If you're writing, you're a writer. And I wish I had thought more about that or been more focused on that as opposed to like like what's gonna make the best book and how will this book be successful and how what do I need to put into it to make it, you know what I mean? I had all these considerations that were really not about like who am I as a writer and what stories do I want to tell and what makes it artistically really interesting as opposed to like what's going to make this book sell. So just I wish I had known more about like how to think about those things first.
That's a really good point because it's all about capitalism, right? We're thinking about how many books can we sell, how much money can we make, right? And
Yeah.
that art gets lost.
Yeah.
Great. What is your writerly superpower?
What is my really superpower? I don't know. Maybe being the gateway for people into short stories, like a magical portal.
Oh, okay, I like that. It's spec. Is it like a scary portal, or is it like more like I'm opening a wardrobe and coming into your world?
Yes, like a white light of like you've only read novels, but look, there's a whole world of short stories and it's great.
I love that. Yeah, I would probably go into the gentle portal, but I'd be scared if it was like a black hole. I'd be like,
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
coming. I'm like, no, I don't want to get lost in there. Um, what are some books that you wish you had written, or something that you really admire or envy in other writers' styles or writing habits?
Oh, what are some things so I mean, like I think your book is a good example of this, that it's really funny, like very witty. There's a lot of like kind of humor to the stories that are still very like poignant. But I'm not funny and I don't think particularly funny. So like I really admire when writers are able to infuse their writing with kind of humor and wit. Um, I also so I I don't know. My writing has more of like a lushness to it, I guess. You wouldn't necessarily describe my writing as sparse per se, but I do really admire. So if I think of like Suvankam Themavongsa's writing, she can do so much with so few words, and I am just in awe of that. Like how did you evoke this with this like one sentence? So that skill is awe-inspiring for me.
Mhm. And I noticed in both of your works, it's that emotional richness. Like that is what I also crave. And I read your work and I can just sit in that imagery. So
Ah,
that's amazing. Thank
thanks.
you. There's
Someone just
someone.
asked who was the author that was just mentioned. Suvankam. I don't know if you want to write it in the chat, but
Mhm.
uh,
How to pronounce knife.
yeah.
Yes. It won the Giller a couple of years ago. Pet peeve in canned lit.
Pet peeve in Canada. What can I say? Um, so there's a joke in Canlit that we're all just passing around the same $20.
I haven't heard
So
that.
yeah, it's so the glass half full way of looking at that is that we are all part of a really supportive community and we all, try and support each other and go to each other's events and you buy each other's books and all these kind of things. Um, but kind of the flip side of that is that many writers are struggle to like keep their writing practice going, and we're all kind of fighting for the same 10 grants. It kind of elevates like prize culture in this country in a weird way, and we kind of know prizes are wonderful. As someone who's won a prize, great. I'm obviously not complaining about that, but there's no such thing as a best book, right? It's arbitrary. It's kind of what three people on a jury in a room can agree to in the span of like a couple hours. That's really what it comes down to. And I've been on the other side of that. I've been on those juries too, so I understand how these decisions get made sometimes. So yeah, there is a sense that like our arts organizations in general are really struggling. We see art spaces closing, really kind of fighting for funding to keep lit magazines going, arts festivals going, literary festivals going. Um, so yeah, I think that's my sort of pet peeve right now, just that it's so hard. It's so hard for writers to really make this work financially. And like
Mhm.
we all have this like there's like a very romanticized idea of kind of the starving artist or this impoverished writer writing a masterpiece. But realistically, it's very hard to be creative when you don't know like how you're going to pay your rent, or you don't, or you're hungry or whatever. So like we all need to have our kind of basic needs met to be creative people.
It's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, people always think like, hey, the writer is struggling in their room, they're cold, but how do you write when you can't pay heat, right?
Yeah.
And you're hungry, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important. We need more arts funding for sure. So how would you commit the perfect murder and get away with it? Because, writers are all very good at planning, and I think spec writers in particular have
Mm.
really good imagination. So how would you get away with it?
No, I know there's a lot of weird murders in my book. So yeah, if I had access to any kind of strange magic or shape-shifting or like like a channel to some divine force, I would do that. I would try and like strike my enemies with lightning or shapeshift and like murder them as a wolf, but then just change back into a human and be like, I don't know, that's weird. Who knew there were wolves in Hamilton? But yeah, so I think if I had access to magic, I would do something like that. In our real world, um, I don't foresee that I would be a good murderer. If I had to murder someone, I would try and convince somebody else to do it. I would try to be uh, influencing enough. I would try to be convincing enough to get someone else to do it.
That's a great answer, especially the wolf. I like to transform it. But
Yeah,
yeah, I guess you could just write a grant, right, for the Can Council and ask for money and hire someone to do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be hysterical? Be like,
I know, like as a
um,
joke. Oh my God, we should do it one day.
yeah, this hitman is so important to my artistic practice. In the next 750 words, I will tell you why.
Exactly. That'd be such a good joke, I think.
Can you imagine if it got funded and then you had to murder somebody?
right? Or at least we could like write a book about having to hire someone to murder someone. But then we have to decide on who to murder. So, but yeah,
Mm.
that'd be hard. Um, and three dead writers that you would take with you on a 6 month residency on a tropical island and why? And assuming that we're going to reanimate them as zombies.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay. Ursula K. Le Guin, I think.
Mhm.
I think she'd be super fun. Um, Anne M. Rice, but like uh Anne from the 80s, like when she was in her
Oh.
super goth like interview with the vampire phase, not later on she got super religious. So we don't want that, Anne. I want gothic vampires, Anne.
Perfect.
Um and Anais Nin, maybe?
That's a good choice. I'm
I
coming
think
on that
she'd be fun.
residency. Yeah, it'd be so fun with Anne and they get along. But honestly,
Yeah.
okay, so these Gen Zs, they don't know what Interview with a Vampire is. I asked them, they don't know who Anne Rice is. We did this like bingo on the first day. So now they have to watch
Are you
Interview with a
watching the show?
Vampire.
There's a new
They're
show
not, they've
now.
never heard of it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay. They're missing out, but maybe they'll like watch it now.
Yes, you
Who
should.
knows? If you like vampires, if you like Twilight, you will like Interview with a Vampire. And my very last question before I let you go, um, your most embarrassing moment at a literary event. You can skip it, but I'm going to like hound you later, find out because I like to know. I'm here for the
Um,
gossip.
you know what? I do. Okay, so I do have a kind of embarrassing thing, and it was like a good learning thing for me. So I was moderating an event for Gritlit, so that's our literary festival here in Hamilton. And I was moderating this with Rima Patel, who's a great writer, and Catherine Hernandez, who like I'm just so in awe of, and I was like so excited to get to like chat with them about their books. And I, in my excitement, made my own kind of like social media post with, and I just Googled them basically and pulled like pictures that I thought were nice off the internet of their faces and made my own little like Instagram thing. And Catherine, like very nicely, not in a mean way, but sort of contacted the festival and was like, "So this is not my approved headshot. Um, can you please use the one I sent you? Because I don't know where you found this one, but this is not like what I'm currently using. And can you use my actual headshot that I sent you?" Which in hindsight is so obvious that I obviously should have just done that. And I was absolutely mortified and apologized to her profusely. And lesson learned.
Yeah, and it's not your fault because you were just so excited and you assumed that the headshot was there. But yeah, it's something that organizers have to learn that often the media has to be approved by the author or the agent or the publicist, right? And that's something you don't
And
know. Yeah, no,
now
no,
that
most people don't know that.
never mind. And it's funny because now that I am on like the other side of that, now that like I'm going to events or whatever, I am the one that's like, just use my headshot, please. Like, do not find a random picture of me from 8 years ago on the internet, please. But it's a small thing in the grand scheme of things, but it was a good learning for me.
hmm Yeah, no, it happens.
It happens.
Yeah. And that sounds like a great panel with Catherine and Rena.
Oh my God. It was so good. They're so brilliant. If you have
hmm
there's I mean all the literary festivals. Do you guys have a literary festival in Winnipeg?
Yes, we just had the Winnipeg Thin Air one. So,
Nice.
hmm
Yeah. Anytime you have an opportunity to go to these festivals, if there's any like virtual things for festivals that happen across the country, if you can go to these things, they're great.
And that's where you find your literary community. Um,
Sometimes, yeah.
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 Well, thank you so much, Anuja. We're really, really pleased that you came here to talk to us, and we learned so much from you. So let's all clap for
Ah,
Anuja. You
thanks for
can't hear
having
it. I see
me.
some people
Ah,
clapping. Yay.
yay. Little virtual claps.
Virtual
Well, my
clapping.
pleasure.
Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.